You know, if there's a blueprint for Silicon Valley savvy with kind of human insight, Randy Komisar either wrote it, inspired it, or coached the person who did it. He's a legendary venture capitalist, entrepreneur, and author, and he spent his career guiding startups and CEOs through this sort of fog of uncertainty, helping them see that success wasn't about valuations or exits, but really about purpose, people, and the long game. Randy was shaped by one of the most important influences in Silicon Valley, Bill Campbell. Bill's fingerprints are all over Randy's approach and his belief that leadership's ultimately about relationships, trust, and helping others succeed. Randy lives Bill's ethos: serve others first, ask hard questions, and measure your life by impact, not activity. That's Bill's playbook. That's Randy. He's part sage, part strategist, and part Silicon Valley soul. Please welcome the man who helps channel best Bill Campbell's legacy, Randy Komisar. So Randy, a little bit of your legacy and background. Tell us how you and Bill originally connected and perhaps some of the incredible lessons you learned along that long road of your amazing relationship.
Yeah, my entire relationship with Bill, which was a good near 40 years long, really started on a note that I think defines it, which is I was the senior counsel at Apple in the early days when the Macintosh came out. And Bill was there as the chief marketing and sales officer. And I actually was responsible for the other half of the company, the research, the engineering, the development organization. He was sales and marketing. We had very few interactions when I got there other than to disagree, right? We were always in meetings where I was telling him what he couldn't do, and he was always screaming at me, and that's kind of how I met Bill. We didn't have a relationship, I didn't think, until one day he comes marching down the corridor into the legal department, grabs me by the shoulder, and walks me into a dark conference room, doesn't turn on the lights, shuts the door, and says, "I'm spinning out the software company tomorrow. I need a co-founder. I'd like you to be it." I couldn't have been more shocked. As I said, I didn't even think I had a relationship with him. I looked at him, and he said, I said, "Well, that's very, very flattering. Let me think about it." And he said, "I need to know now." And he didn't tell me what my job was. He didn't tell me what my comp was. He didn't tell me anything about the role. And I made the best decision of my whole life. I said yes. And from then on in, Bill and I were like this until the day died.
And the path had its bumps along the road. I was actually involved, Randy, in the investment banking team that was looking at the spin-out of Claris, which ultimately Apple decided not to do. But that led to Bill and yourselves and another launching another company. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and what extraordinary lessons you learned?
Well, I'll tell you first about the sale of Claris. Again, very telling about Bill. Bill had built a reputation inside Apple in those days as being completely volatile and mercurial. People loved Bill. The rank and file loved working for Bill. The executive team feared him. And he had been known for throwing a chair at the general counsel of Apple in a board meeting. By the way, skills I tried to pick up, and I realized that only Bill could do, right, over time. But what was interesting about that was when Apple came back to us about 2 years into the Claris story, when we were going to spin it out as a public company, well, we were going to have to do Microsoft products. And at the time, it was a fierce rivalry between the two. And Apple got wind of the fact that we had in our S1 filings actually indicated we were going to make Microsoft products. And so Apple immediately zoomed in and said, "We're going to exercise our option. We're going to buy you. And here's the price." And I was the liaison on this, and I was trying to figure out how to negotiate because I had no negotiating power. And I remembered Bill, and I said, Bill's not going to like that. And you could hear the silence on the other side. And I said, you know, he can cause a lot of trouble. And Bill's very unpredictable. So I think we should double the price. And we didn't quite double the price, but we almost did just on the threat of Bill being a wild man at Apple. So, yeah, Bill's character was an asset to me more than once. I can remember when we did our next company, which was Go Corporation, which was in the pen computing space early on. We were sort of Bill used to refer to it as Go Going Gone because the company was not a success. But when we were dealing with AT&T at one point, and they were negotiating a price with us about an investment, and I can remember Bill walked in the room, I filled him in on what was going on, he got the phone, he said, here's what I think of your investment, and the phone flew across the room. Bill leaves the room, I pick it up, and I negotiated the price. And that's how Bill and I worked a lot. There was another great episode. I'm going to have to apologize in advance for Bill's stories, but they just pop into mind after a while, and I've got 40 years of them. But I can remember when we were trying to do that AT&T deal and raise some capital, Bill had been in a bicycling accident. He'd actually been riding down here on Sand Hill Road, crashed. He broke some ribs. He collapsed a lung. He was in the hospital. And I had the AT&T finance people coming out to essentially look at us and to finally give us some term sheet the next night. And so suddenly I don't have Bill. Your star player is sidelined. And I get a call from Bill the next morning. He says, you got to come get me. I said, Bill, you're in the hospital. You got a collapsed lung. You got broken ribs. They're not letting you out. He said, no, they're not going to let me out. I need you to get here at 6 o'clock. There's a change in the nursing station at 6 o'clock. I need you to go to Roberta, his wife at the time, and get a set of clothes. I want the blue suit. Bring it up to me. We're going to go down the back stairs. I'm going to go to dinner. Then you're going to take me back to the hospital. I'm going to go back up. You take the clothes. We're done. We did it just that way. That was Bill.
One of the, interesting and amazing stories is Bill wanted to be CEO. He was passionate about being CEO. Now it was opportunity at Go Corporation. And like a lot of the technology businesses, they were way ahead of their time, and the business struggled with adoption. And so ultimately, the notion was we're going to downsize, we're going to sell the technology, et cetera. But I remember some great stories of his compassion when you have to go through tough times. That was one of the things as a coach, he taught a generation of people about how you can lead with empathy. And when you have to go through tough periods, part of what I recall from stories of former employees is, when the board decided we're shutting this down, he didn't go in his office and hide or cry in the closet or something. He helped people pack their things in their office, and he physically brought them to the parking lot and gave them all a big hug. And he did that all day long. He didn't, woe is me, what's next for me, people don't blame me. He stood up and he led with compassion and empathy. Is that?
That was very true. I mean, one thing I learned from Bill, having done many riffs with Bill, was that first and foremost, you thought about the employee. That was it. Everything came from the perspective of how the employee was going to receive that information. It was not about the company. It wasn't about you. It was about the employee. And in those riffs, leading up to that, there's when we had to sell that company, when we sold it for pittance, but when we had to sell the company, there were two things that I think were striking about Bill in particular. One was that I was the guy raising all the money. And at the time, it was one of the biggest holes in Silicon Valley. We created one of the biggest holes in Silicon Valley. Today, it's tiny compared to the numbers you normally see. But in those days, the amount of money we lost in investment was pretty significant. And so I was raising the money the whole time. A quick aside. So we sell Claris. Bill goes to Go Corporation as CEO. That's great. I'm at Claris. Apple has now bought us. Apple is now giving me an executive position. I've wanted to get out of the legal role for my whole life. Suddenly I'm out of the legal role. I'm an executive at Apple. I got a great job. Who shows up at my house? Bill. Drives up in his car. He never goes to my house. He drives up in his car. I'm out there, working on a fence or something. He goes, I need you. And I go, I've got this job, I got this, finally got what I wanted, Bill, it's success. He goes, no, I need you. And I go, Bill, I can't, I got that. He goes, no, you don't understand. I need you, and I need you next week. And I said, well, Bill, what am I going to do? And he said, I don't know, you can be the CFO. Now, mind you, I've been a lawyer. I'd never even opened a spreadsheet. And Bill goes, be the CFO. I said, fine. I took the job, I joined Bill, and about 3 weeks later, I figured out we were out of money. Took me 3 weeks because I never really had opened a spreadsheet. So at that point, we had to raise money, and I started this process of 2 years of raising money over and over and over again for Bill, upping the valuation. At one point, I walk into Bill's office. I go, Bill, I can't do it anymore. I don't believe we can do what we say we are going to do. We don't have credibility. And Bill looked at me. It was very interesting, because I've had these discussions with other CEOs in the past. He looked at me and he said, so you're telling me you don't believe we can do this? And I said, no. And he said, what do you think we should do? And I said, I think we should sell the company. And he said, that's what we will do. No bullshit, no lying, no running away from the problem, no running away from me, no arguing with me. I was his trusted guy. He trusted me to tell him the truth. I told him the truth, and we acted on it. Now, as a funny aside, and this room will enjoy this, so we're negotiating this deal, and we got one party we're negotiating with, only one party we're negotiating with. So you can imagine I don't have a lot of bargaining power with these guys. And they actually can see the inside of our balance sheet and our cash coming down every day. And they know that we are headed for zero, because I can't raise more money. So they call us into a room, a bunch of AT&T people and the new purchasers and a bunch of people who Bill just can't stand. Call Bill and I into a room, and they basically said, here's the deal. We're going to tell you a price. You have to sell it. You have no choice. You're going down the drain. And Bill said, I will close the place down. I will send everybody home with a severance check before I sell it to you at a price that I feel is completely unfair. And they laughed at him. Now, Bill and I leave the room, and here's the interesting aside. In the room is a guy who's a very good friend of Bill, Dave Kinzer. And Dave Kinzer, basically, who's been, like me, working with Bill for 20 years, says to him, you shouldn't laugh. Let me give you a story. We were at the Super Bowl last year. Bill buys tickets for all of his friends, flies us down for the weekend. It's a great time. He buys extra tickets this year. 2 friends don't show up. They're worth $1,000 a piece. We walk down the line into the stadium, and everybody's now trying to purchase the tickets, and they're trying to negotiate him down. They're trying to get a crappy deal on those tickets. He knows they're worth $1,000 a piece. They're trying to buy them cheap. He gets to the gate. He has not sold the tickets. He sees a father and a son with a sign that says, please, any extra tickets, my son wants to see the Super Bowl. Bill gives the tickets to them. The AT&T people are shocked. They know that we are going to close the company down, and suddenly we get a fair price.
I've also heard some interesting moments of enlightenment from Bill that you and the team, Donna, Dubinsky, and others, sort of began to give him some feedback. Can you tell us about the circumstances and Bill's sort of reaction from hearing from his executive team?
Well, Bill was no saint, and like anybody else, he could make his mistakes. And my sense in that with most people, particularly in positions of power, is you got to be very careful on how you tell them that their clothes are shabby or non-existent. And we sat down with Bill one day because we were having some issues with his pushing the team too hard, particularly around a couple of projects that he wanted to get done. And we went to Bill and we just said, look, this thing's coming apart at the seams. If you don't capitulate on this, we're going to end up losing a lot of people, and we're not going to get these projects done, and the company's going to be compromised. I got to tell you, Bill didn't say much in that meeting. The next day, Bill was completely different when he came into that office. He really cared about what we had to say, and I think the most important thing here is he trusted us, and we trusted Bill. The relationships with Bill, not just that I had and others had with him that worked with him in executive roles, was you always knew that Bill was going to do the right thing. I have next to my computer in my office a picture of Bill and I, to this day, to Bill and I. And every day I look at that, and particularly in tough times, and I look at it not because it gives me warm feelings of Bill, which it does, it's because it reminds me to be my best self. That's what Bill brought out in all of us. Bill, a coach can teach you skills, right? They can make you really good at your job. There are coaches all over Silicon Valley. The term is unfortunately been diluted in how it's used. Bill was a mentor. Bill didn't just make you better at your job. Bill made you better at being you. And in the end, that's what he cared about. He cared about you being your best self. That's how he measured success. I disappointed him. He wanted me to be a great CEO. I went off and ran LucasArts Entertainment and then another company, and I didn't like it. I didn't like being a CEO. I liked working for Bill, right? I liked being the second. And so, I could tell in the end that, Bill thought I should be a CEO. I did not think I should be a CEO. I created a different role for myself in the Valley, which Bill ultimately actually adopted in a way, which was called virtual CEO. And I would work a series of companies at the same time. That fit my personality. That fit my character. It actually became what Bill used a lot when he started to work with companies. But when it was clear that I had no intention of continuing to be a CEO, Bill put his arm around me and said, "What are we going to do? How can I help you?" And that was Bill.
Yeah, I'm going to share one other personal experience about Bill, and then we're going to open up for questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Great. Bill and I sat on the board of a venture-backed company, and we were probably the third quarter in a row where the chief revenue officer had missed plan. And in that meeting, Bill was really frustrated because it was fair enough to miss plan, but he was hearing the same excuses on a repeated basis. So the board meeting ends, the management team leaves, we have an executive session, he turns to the CEO, and he said, "You've got to fire that guy today, that chief revenue officer. We're done," right? But then he turned to everybody else in the meeting and he said, "Each of you has to commit to me that you will meet with him next week to help him find his next opportunity." And the thing he said was this. He said, he's going to lose his job today, but he cannot lose his dignity, right? Who says that? Who in our sphere thinks about the person, who's going to deal with a crisis in their life, but try to bring solutions to that? And that's the, sort of brilliance of Bill Campbell. So you have to have questions for Randy, so let's get a microphone. Here we go. Here we go.
Sir, thank you so much for being here. Zachary Peck. One of the things you talked about with Bill, amazing stories that you told about all your experiences with him and making that leap for that first decision, him pulling you into that dark conference room and just, no other reasoning to say yes, but you just said yes. And we talked a lot about trust so far at this conference and how it's a big proponent of being a successful leader. What would you say Bill Campbell embodied that made you trust him like that to make that leap?
I would say there's a lot to it, but I would say the thing that stuck out most was I saw Bill do the right thing that was not in his self-interest multiple times, right? So when you see somebody do the right thing and it's not in their own interest to do it, you trust them. You realize that they're operating on a set of principles and a compass, a moral compass, that as much as you might agree or disagree with at any point, you realize is fair. Bill was very much into fairness and compassion. And that showed in all of his relationships. We're here talking about Bill and some of the great things he's accomplished, and you are a lot of the great things that he's accomplished. But I can remember I was asked in an article written about him, I think in 2010 or something by the New York Times, what stood out about Bill? And, Bill had successes. He had run into it. He had sat on multiple boards. He had done a variety of startup work with people. He had had lots of successes. But that's not what distinguished Bill. What distinguished Bill were all the people he touched, who went out and then did other great things and touched other people. And that circle, that contagion of great character and compassion, that was Bill. That was Bill in the world. And so Bill was so much bigger than any job that he had.
All right. One last question.
Thanks for sharing your stories about Bill. I'm wondering, how did being a practicing lawyer help you transition and be successful in the business world?
Well, I didn't love law school. But I did learn a bunch in law school, particularly how to think, right, and how to address a problem. And it was clear that going to law school gave me my value early on to places like Apple, and even Bill. When Bill brought me in, all he saw was that I was very effective as an attorney and could get things done. I would say, and I'm much kinder, I think, to my law school experience than I was early on. Early on, I kind of rejected it in large part. I felt like it was incongruent with who I was and what I did. I'd say, as I look back on it, I think it was formative in giving me a really clear way to think through an issue, to prioritize, and to be able to communicate that effectively to the parties that were, on the other side of the table in particular. I was a different kind of lawyer, though. I mean, I understood the law and my job, but the reason I didn't like being a lawyer early on, and the reason I sort of rejected the big law firm practice, which I was a part of, was, our job there was to reduce risk to zero, right? Our job was to make sure that there was no risk on the table, which meant effectively you couldn't do anything. And I saw my job as attorney as different than that. My job as an attorney was to figure out what the risks were, figure out the best advice on how to move forward to accomplish whatever the task was, and understand what risks we were taking, articulate that clearly, and get the team to move forward with an agreement on what that was. So it was a different approach. Today, I sit on the advisory boards for one of the biggest law firms in the country, and I've recently said to them, I should come back in there and get my bar exam, reinstated again. It's time to be a frickin' lawyer, right? So the world needs more lawyers right now. No, the world's better. The world of lawyers are better without me actually practicing.
One final question for Randy. Anybody? Here we go. Right here's, there we go.
How you doing? Just maybe speaking to some of the more entrepreneurial minds in the audience today, and given your decades and generations of experience here in the Valley, working with some innovative companies, I was wondering, and also building off of Scott's last lecture about the opportunities that are opening up with some of the new technological progress we've seen and the problems that can be solved. I was curious just to get your take on what company would you like to see built or problem solved by this next generation of founders and entrepreneurs in the sector?
Now, are you asking what problem I'd like to see solved?
Yes, sir.
Well, I will tell you what I'm not enthusiastic about right now, which is the deafening din of chatbot AI and the ideas that the sort of the science fiction that I see in the Valley, so sort of surrounding this AI future. I will tell you, I'm not enthusiastic about that. I am very enthusiastic about AI. But more about things like AI solving issues. Anybody heard about AlphaFold here? It's a Google project where DeepMinds, the organization that they have in London, actually came up with an AI program that has defined and discovered some of the most important proteins in the world. And they've done it in a way that would have taken thousands of years otherwise. There are lots of real applications of AI that are interesting. This whole chat thing and the amount of attention that's being spent and money being spent on it, to me, is wasteful. I do think, ultimately, the problem I would love technology to solve is the issue of fairness, of equality. Those don't sound like business issues or technical issues, but those are the issues that I think as a generation of leaders we need to be thinking about in the context of the businesses we create. How are we going to create businesses and technologies and products and services that are fair, that are empowering, that create opportunity, that raise people up, that are not extractive, but are creative, meaning they create things that didn't exist before. They're not stealing from one pocket to put into the other. How, as leaders, can we make sure that the organizations that we're responsible for have the character to stand up when challenged around those issues of equality and opportunity and fairness? Because if we don't get our arms around those issues, then I think we're going down a deep hole.
On that positive note. No, but please join me in thanking Randy.